And hand over to our guest speaker
Okay,
tonight, Alan.
thank you for that introduction, Rob. Um, wow, what's going on? It's frozen.
Yeah, if you haven't moved the screen for a while, it may take
Right,
just a
okay,
while. There you go.
there we go.
Yeah.
Picture of the Battle of Trafalgar. And I thought I'd start by sharing with you um, why I became involved in sustainability. And it goes back to me discovering that my great great grandfather, William Barton, was at the Battle of Trafalgar. 205 years later, I actually sailed over the spot where the battle took place. And I remember thinking a couple of things. One was, well, I wonder what his life was like. And the second one was, well, I wonder what my great 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 grandchildren's life will be like. And I then thought, wow, well, we better start living in harmony with our planet. And it prompted me to become involved in sustainability. And this is a picture of our home, and our home needs your help. And tonight I'm going to talk about sustainability. And my view is that simply described is treasuring our planet. I'm going to talk about a concept called ecology and circular economy. And in that, I used the original Greek meaning of the words ecology is our home and everything in it, and economy is the management of our home. And then I'm going to talk about what you and others can do. Now, during this, if you see the red slide, it means you've got to do some work. So your first question to think about is, since the beginning of humankind, what has caused the biggest impact on our planet? And if you'd like to think about that and put your answer in the chat, that would be good. And I'm going to start with a little history lesson of, well, how did we get to today? And 2 million years, we were hunters and gatherers and lived in harmony with our planet. Then we had an agricultural revolution, and that was followed by our first city being formed as population grew. Our trade increased, and Petra was established off the back of the spice trade. And then 4,000 years ago was the first time we actually put sewage into rivers. And that was a good idea, wasn't it? And then over a space of about 3,000 years, we significantly deforested the continent of Europe. Then we started exporting our way of life around the world. And then we discovered we could get energy from coal. And then this gentleman developed a concept called gross domestic product. And then the big event, the Industrial Revolution. We then discovered we could get gas from coal. And then we discovered oil. And this gentleman was the first person to identify a correlation between increases in temperature and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but he was laughed at. We then started importing gas into the UK, and in 2015, our average temperature was 1 degree hotter. 2023, we had a peak at 1.5 degrees. So what have we done? Well, we have increased population growth, and population growth grew tremendously after the First World War. And we have destroyed the wilderness. And now we have a large percentage of our land is put over to grazing of animals and growing crops for people. And that's resulted in a lot of our animal friends disappearing. And there is the view that we are at the start of the next mass extinction event. And we now generate an enormous amount of energy and produce a large amount of greenhouse gases. And those gases has caused our temperatures to rise. Now, raise your hand if you don't believe in climate change. He said, I can't see anybody, which is good. But we do get the odd naysayer, and they say, well, it's just a cycle. Well, yes, our planet does go through cycles, and there is an ice age about every approximately 100,000 years. But at this moment, we've got the highest level of CO2 for 2 million years and a highest level of methane for 650,000 years. And if you look at the upside of these graphs, it's roughly 1 degree every 3,300 years. And in the last 260 years, we've gone up 1.1 degrees. And it's that rate of increase, which is the highest in the history of this planet, which is alarming. Our GDP has risen tremendously, as has our ability to produce stuff. And in the past 6 years, we've used over 500 billion tons of material. That's nearly as much as the entirety of the 20th century. And we've plundered the oceans. And we now produce an enormous amount of waste. Municipal waste globally, 2.1 billion tons in 2023, and 33% of that is not managed in an environmentally safe manner. And you'll notice that the biggest increase in rate is the southern nations as they become more like the West. So in the past 100 years, what have we done? Well, our population has gone up by a factor of 4. Our wildness has gone down and our extinctions have gone up, as has our greenhouse gases. And I just wonder if you can estimate how much do you think GDP has gone up? And again, if you stick the answer in the chat, might be good. Anyway, the answer is 24, which is alarming. And that's sent our waste up by a factor of 10 and our use of resources up by 12 and the amount of energy we make up by a factor of 9. And we've gone outside what the planet can take on various areas. We've got to stay within the circle, within the green. And this highlights that our problem with climate change is not just carbon, it's the greenhouse gases as well. And the number of our animal friends is decreased, as is the available biosphere to allow them to flourish. And we've obviously deforested. And this is a worry. Globally, some of our rivers are decreasing to the point where it's an issue. And even more worryingly, our green water, which is the water that grows our crops, is gone outside as well, as has the amount of fertilizer we use and the amount of synthetic substances and other materials that harm our planet. We did live in harmony with our planet till humankind's population grew and developed. In my lifetime, we've gone from simple side rules and wind-up watches to the complexity of today. Now, I asked you this question, and I wonder what you said. But my answer is its biggest impact has been population growth, because it's impacted on everything else we do. So why do we need to take action? Well, our population is destined to grow even further. And we have warmed our planet, particularly at the poles. And if you look at Greenland, the ice cap, this was an alarming picture because the white is snow, but the red is meltwater. And it's the first time we saw the entire of that ice cap melting. And if we get to a temperature of plus 1.8 over a few thousand years, that ice cap will completely disappear. And our rescinding glaciers is resulting in higher sea levels. And our increased temperature at the poles is decreasing the deep sea ocean currents. And it's those currents that distribute the nutrients from the poles and equally control our weather. And if you look at it globally, we've impacted on everywhere apart from where it's very cold or very dry. And I just ask, based on this graph, how many planets do we need? Well, for the world to live the same as the average of the top 20 nations, I wonder if you can anticipate how many planets we need. Well, the answer is for 8 billion people, we need 3.6. And if we get to 12 billion people, we need 5.5. And we're becoming worried about tipping points. And these are where our ecosystems completely collapse irreversibly. and we are getting more and more concerned about those. So what harm are we doing? Well, this is an Adelie penguin and it's about to die of hypothermia because there's now a lot more water in Antarctica and from the melting of glaciers, and his little coat doesn't keep him warm. And you'll be aware of the rainforests, and we treat our oceans as a dump, and we are plundering our fish. And we now have higher temperatures and more forest fires and more extreme weather events. And last year I was fortunate, I went to Antarctica and I was horrified to actually see and witness glaciers melting at an alarming rate. And 5 years before this picture was taken, the ship could not have got there because it was a glacier. And the Arctic sea ice is a record low in June 23. But equally, whereas there, I became more aware of the complexity and interconnectedness of our home and the damage we are doing. If we're not careful, we can end up like the good people of Easter Island, once a vibrant society, but when Captain Cook arrived, he found a bunch of miserable subsistence farmers. And one theory is that they chopped down all the trees and that impacted on their society. Just imagine the transition they would have gone through. So I asked, what ones of these do you think are really important? Pick 3. Okay. Well, my answer to that question is it's driven by population growth, by what we've done to climate change, and equally driven by our economies being based on gross domestic product. Now, this is a difficult question for you. Well, it's fairly easy, really. But what are these 3 pictures showing? I'll come back to that. So what must we do? Well, we must start considering sustainability in all things, including the resources that support all life on our planet. And we must deliver on the UN sustainability goals. We've got to start treasuring our planet's whole ecology, particularly with regard to carbon and the greenhouse gases, the natural world, material resources, water, atmosphere, and population. And just starting with greenhouse gases, well, we obviously need to get our energy from the sun in the form of solar, wind, or biomass, and we can get it from gravity with the form of tides and obviously differential head of water. And if we grow biomass, we can burn it or we can turn it into liquids and gases. And that's a picture of the first plane to fly across the Atlantic on a renewable fuel. And hopefully our clever engineers solve the challenges of fusion. But we need to look at all of the greenhouse gases, not just carbon, methane, nitrous oxide, and the fluorinated gases as well. And we need to study all of the sources of that, particularly with regard to electricity and heat. And we need all nations to take part, particularly the large producers of greenhouse gases. And encouragingly, some of them are going down, but unencouragingly, some are still high and some are still going up. And this is an interesting graph. This plots the UK's actual energy use since 2017. And the red line is electricity, and the green line is renewables from wind, which is actually, as you can see, going up. But the line to look at is the blue line, which is the gas we consume for heat and power. And if we want to replace that with electricity, we've got to build a lot of power stations. And if we are going to make a transition, we should really do it quickly. Now, as far as the UK goes, I've got a number of questions. Well, the first one is, where are we actually now? Do we actually understand that? And more importantly, where are we actually going? And I thought, well, if I was in charge of this transition, what would my program be? Well, the first thing I'd do is I'd decide on some technical matters. What are we going to do on a windless night? What percentage of each of the renewables can we actually get to? And can we store? And how are we going to distribute? And can we get our oil and gas friends to develop and install CCS on the back of their large production plants. But then I'd agree a strategy with those that can deliver it, and we just need to simply get our politicians to decide, legislate, and then we've got to build it. And building it, I think, is the easiest part of that graph. And I just ask the question, is there a joined up plan? Because if you're aware of one, please let me know, because I'm not. To achieve it by 2050, what I do know is we need to get on with it now. So as far as carbon is concerned, we must deliver on our COP promises, and we must focus on methane and the other greenhouse gases, and focus on all the sectors and develop a joined up plan to get there. Natural world, well, it's obvious. We've got to stop that, and we've got to stop plundering the oceans. And we've got to realise that we're going to have fires if we get increases. And we've got to realise that some of our animal friends are going to disappear. And I actually witnessed puffins in the wild this year, and I was devastated to discover it's anticipated by the year 2050 there will only be 10% of the puffins there are today. And other animals in the UK are declining as well. And the number of endangered species is rising. So as far as the natural world is concerned, we must try and re-establish the natural world in the rainforests. And to do that, we need to deliver on our COP15 promises. Material resources, well, that word simply needs to disappear, and we need to consider everything as a resource. And we need to move away from the circular economy to a circular economy. And unfortunately, according to this report, we're actually going backwards. And that's supported by statistics from the UN. But we do need to have a circular economy in all manufactured goods, and all producers and customers need to take part in that. And we need it for the built environment as well. Here's an example. This poor lady had 2 operations, one after the other. And those are all the once used disposable items that they used during those operations. And I know that the NHS are putting a lot of effort into changing that. We've got to start treasuring the planet's resources for the future. Did we really treasure our rainforests? Did we treasure the fossil fuel resources we had by simply burning them? And we've got to realise the planet's resources are finite, and we must not disperse of them beyond the reach of future generations. Phosphorus fertilizers, as an example, will eventually end up in rivers and oceans, and how are future generations going to get them? Just look at the chemicals and plastics we put into the ocean. And if we put resources into a landfill, if it's organic, it's going to go and end up as methane. If it's corrodable, it will end up as a salt, and that salt will end up eventually in the oceans. And we shouldn't put inorganic residue, including plastics, into thermal treatment. What happens if you put a mobile phone into an incinerator? What happens to the indium, which gives us the touchscreen capability? Well, its boiling point is above the temperature of the incinerator, so it will stay as a solid. And that solid will probably end up in the aggregate that comes out the bottom of the incinerator and get dispersed to the point where we won't be able to find the indium again. And there are other critical materials which we need to protect. And if you look at the mobile phone, 6 elements found in the mobile phone are set to run out in the next 100 years. Indium is set to run out in 20 years. So I believe we need to research and design and develop repositories so our resources we can separate and recycle today so future generations can get at them. So we must reduce consumption if we can, and we must treasure our material resources. And we must get to the point where we do not produce waste. Water, well, yeah, we've got to stop that. We've got to stop protecting our rivers. And we've got to look at all of the sources of pollution into rivers. By far the largest is agricultural runoff, then it's sewage, then it's runoff from roads and highways, and then it's the synthetic chemicals. And we've got to stop turning Lake Windermere green. We've got to realise that we're going to get more extreme weather events in the UK, and they are set to increase over the coming years, as is our sea level. It's just a question of by how much, and that will result in floods. And our last reservoir was built in 1991, and a lot of our reservoirs don't get topped up by the extreme weather as much as they should do. So we do have an issue with water supply. And we've got to stop treating our oceans as a dump. But equally, we need to treasure and value our water. The average cost to a household of water is £1.30 a day. Now, you just think how much you spend on coffee. And we really do need to try and get the global temperature back down, and we really do need to base our solutions on nature if we can. Atmosphere, well, we're not doing too bad in the UK, but some places aren't. So we must strive for clean air and clean technologies, including transport. Population, well, I've travelled the world, and the one thing I notice is there are a lot of people everywhere. And it's been the elephant in the room, really, because there's only two people I know who have said we've got a problem with population. One was the previous Duke of Edinburgh, and the other one was David Attenborough, because they know that where there are people, there aren't animals. So we must try and provide a reasonable lifestyle for all people on our planet, and then hopefully the birth rate will be equal approximately to the death rate. So we've got to look after all of the ecologies on our planet and develop a way of managing them in a circular economy way. And obviously, we must deliver on all the UN sustainability goals to achieve that. Next question. This one's a bit more difficult. What do they have in common? So what needs to be done? Well, we need people to change. And we need to do that a behavioural change programme and a sense of urgency. And we need it now, not when it's too late. So what must you do? Well, I thought, how do I impact on the planet? And I thought about it and I developed this. And I said, well, I travel. And I'm looking at my modes of travel. I'm trying to walk more and ride a bike more, which is difficult with my age. And I'm pleased to report our newest car is an electric one. And I'm looking at the heat, light and power in my house. Fortunately, I've got a relatively new house, so the insulation is good, but I'm certainly looking at usage. And as far as the food and drink I consume, I'm trying to eat more vegetable meals to cut down on the amount of rainforest we chop down to grow grazing for animals. And I'm questioning the source and distance travelled. Do I really need to eat asparagus from Peru? And I'm trying to eat more organic food to cut down on the fertilizers we use. And fortunately, I've got a garden, so I can compost my unused food. As far as the clothes I buy, I'm trying not to buy man-made fibre because the plastics end up in the oceans. And I'm trying to buy good quality clothes that last for a time as opposed to cheap stuff. And as far as the goods I buy for and the machines in my home, I'm questioning when I do, how sustainable is it designed? What's its life? How frequently am I going to upgrade it? Do I really need a new phone every year? Can it be repaired? Can it be dismantled? Can it be recycled? What happens to it at the end of its life? But the big question is, do I really need it? I'm trying to conserve and respect water and encourage sustainable infrastructure. Aristotle said, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is a habit, not an act. We need to get it that this sort of thought process is a habit throughout society. Other things you must do, well, now you're aware, I think it's your responsibility to start trying to get other people to change. And please vote for politicians that genuinely deliver on sustainable futures, and buy goods from corporates that you've looked into and see if they genuinely do practice sustainability in all they do. Play your part in the circular economy. Yes, recycle, take materials back to your reuse and recycling centres, but equally compost your organic waste or put it in the bins to go off to anaerobic digestion. But start thinking about minimization. Do you really need to buy the stuff you buy? But, you know, my question to you is, this is the black bag, the wheelie bin, where can it go? Question mark. Well, there are only two answers to that. One is it's either put into landfill, or two, it's either put into an incinerator, because it's contaminated, it's dirty, it's no use to anyone. Yes, the tin cans can be recycled, but everything else is not going to be recycled. So we need to minimize that fraction as much as we can. What must you do at work? Well, hey, if you can work for a corporate, that would be really good. If they're not, maybe you can apply pressure to them to change. And, you know, really study their ESG report, see if it's good, because 25% of people don't believe what corporates tell them. So, one question for you. I'd be interested to know how many of you know what your carbon footprint is. Because if you don't, it's quite easy to find out. World Wildlife Federation have got an app. It only takes a few moments to fill it in. You will probably be horrified. Now, I normally get a question of, well, I'm only one person, what can I do? Well, I just thought, well, when can one or two people make a difference? Well, Gandhi made a difference. Petra Kelly made a difference because she was the founder of the Green Party in Germany that went on to influence the European Union to be more environmentally concerned. These two gentlemen developed the UN. Rosa Parks was one of the first to get involved in civil rights in the United States. And you should all be aware of what Mandela did in South Africa. Emily Pankhurst helped get the ladies the votes. And Greta, bless her, has millions of followers. The Queen with what she did in the Commonwealth, and David, or Sir David, for what he's done to raise awareness of this whole issue. So what must our politicians do? Well, they've got to find a solution and a way forward. And they do that. They've got to involve and listen to all stakeholders. They are going to have to make decisions and legislate and use fiscal measures to make things happen if they're not happening. But they've got to be consistent over the long term, not just a short-term 4-year cycle. It would be good if we could develop a standard for recycled products and services so that we know that these goods we're buying are to a recycling standard. And it would be good if they could share best practice lessons and the things we've learned with developing nations to save them making the same mistakes. And we obviously need to develop sustainable cities because no more of us live in the city than elsewhere. But we do need to find a path through the complexity towards clear goals based on science and engineering. And these are some of the issues that need to be addressed to do that. So they need to establish scientists and engineers to consider the complexity and work with sociologists to inform society the actual facts so society can choose what's important in our lives. And obviously we do need a behavioural change programme in a sense of urgency. But what we really need as well is we need to find a new paradigm based on health, safety, well-being, reasonable prosperity for all, and our planet's ecology, not just GDP. What must corporates do? Well, they've got to imagine a world without fossil fuels, and they've got to imagine a circular world. And they've got to change all their products and all their services to be circular. They've got to design it so that we do not produce any waste. Now, I think we need more daisies as well, because I took my mobile phone back into the Apple shop and said, if I return this old phone to you, what happens to it? And he said, oh, you need to see Daisy. Daisy is their robot that takes mobile phones apart. They've increased the number to 5 now, and they have a plan by the year 2030 to be self-sufficient in their raw materials, which is excellent. I just wish they would do a replaceable battery. Corporates should also really consider the potential for unforeseen consequences from their actions. Wouldn't it be good if those that started the Industrial Revolution decided not to use fossil fuel? And I just wonder if any of you recognise who this man was. And he was a pretty clever chap, really, because he developed unleaded petrol and CFCs. He was charged by an American corporate to solve the problem of knocking in internal combustion engines. And he came up with two solutions. One was ethanol and one was lead in petrol. And because the corporate could make 0.1 cents per gallon more through leaded petrol, they picked leaded petrol and caused more pollution in this world than anyone else. And obviously CFCs damaged the ozone layer. When we started producing man-made clothes, did we really realize that the fibers would end up in the oceans? And just look at what we've done with plastics. These things are just getting into the oceans, getting into the food chain and getting into us. And it's now spread throughout the world. And we've now got what they lovingly refer to as forever chemicals because they are so resistant. And they are now getting into the food chain and getting into us. And there are views that that's not very good for our health. And I just question, we're relying on a lot of lithium. And have we really thought that through? Be good if they provided more information so we could make informed choices. And it would be really good if they encouraged the new engineers and developed the new engineers to help us solve the problem. But what can London do? Well, it could demonstrate to the world how it can be done and be a world leader. What can the city do? Well, they can encourage corporates not to greenwash and they can encourage good quality ESG reporting and equally ensure genuine sustainability is a key factor in all funding. What can the livery companies do? Well, they can all take part in the Livery Climate Action Group and they can all develop a sustainable policy. And they can all influence their field of work to be sustainable. Now I've got two key questions. The first one is a difficult one. Is humankind doomed? Are our seas going to rise where billions of people have to migrate? Will we have enough green water to grow our crops, or will we end up with mass famines? Will we have more fires? Will our oceans rise to the point where the Great Barrier Reef disappears? And how many of our animal friends will disappear? And will we have enough resources? Will we end up like Easter Island? Or will it develop into something far worse? Are we heading for a train crash? Second question is a bit more positive. Is there hope? Well, there were three moments when humankind achieved incredible things. The first one was during the Second World War. The United States increased its production of ships and planes tremendously, and that helped us win the war. And we did put a man on the moon, and we did develop a vaccine very quickly. And we need the same mindset applied to living in harmony with our planet. I'm encouraged that some nations are going down, obviously not the others. I'm encouraged we stop whaling and the humpback whale has returned. And I'm encouraged that when we discovered the rats imported from the whaling ships into South Georgia were devastating the bird life, we did something about it. And in 2019, Georgia was declared rat-free. I apologise if you're a rat lover. And I'm encouraged by the efforts of the young because they realise what is happening to our world and are passionate about doing something. So I believe, providing we get on with it now, there is hope. So this question you might want to think about, but if you had three wishes to solve this challenge we face, what would they be? My email address will appear later if you want to share them. If I had three wishes, I would get these guys, the global leaders, to realise the urgency and get on with it now, not in 2025. If there are any barriers or silos preventing progress, I would get them knocked down. But most of all, I'd take a giant leap towards sustainability in all things and the resources that support all life on our planet. My generation contributed to the problem, but we have realized what is happening and started to do something. Your generation has the challenge of making the change. And I've always believed that we should pitch ourselves against more and more difficult challenges, because by doing so we grow. And just think of the reward there'll be for saving society. I asked you 2 questions, and I suppose I should give you the answer to them. Well, these are my son's 3 boys, and these are baby fur seals, and these are baby gentoo penguins. And what they've got in common is they all behave the same. They run around, they push each other over, they fight with each other, and they make an enormous amount of noise. But they are all wonderful, and they are the future. If we all play our part, then hopefully our great-great-great-grandchildren will enjoy this wonderful world as much as we do. And I'm going to finish with something I saw at the end of the BBC Earth experience in London.
Today, at the BBC Earth experience, you've had the opportunity to see something of the wonders of planet Earth and its extraordinary diversity of life across each of our 7 continents. But the way many of us are living our lives today is putting a huge strain on our planet, and the natural world as a result is fading. With the changing climate, over-exploitation of natural resources and a drastic reduction in biodiversity, we are facing a critical moment for the future of life on Earth. That future depends on our actions now. Nature is our greatest ally. Whenever and wherever we restore, protect and nurture the natural world, it brings balance back to our planet, and we all share in the benefits. We are both part of the natural world and the greatest problem solvers that have ever existed. This surely should give us the motivation and hope we need. It is within our power to make a difference. We can do it. We must do it. Then there will be a future for planet Earth and for us all.
Okay, my last question for you, which is a really serious one. I'd like you to email me with what you are going to pledge to do to help. And there's my email address. And we're now going to have questions and discussions. But if you want to make a note of the email address now before I close the presentation down, that would be good.